Hello everyone, welcome back to another one of these updates on what I've been playing, and as you know I've been working my way through the entire Yakuza franchise this year. Last time we spoke I had finished 4 and was well on my way through 5, and since then I finished 5 and 6. So I finished up the Kiryu saga 0 through 6, started with 0 at the end of last year, and man, 5 was crazy. They went nuts. They went all out. I couldn't believe I knew from going in, because having seen some reviews and just hearing general discussion and things on Twitter over the years since these came out, I had some general ideas going into the series of what were some of the fan favorites and what were some of the differences between them, and I knew 5 was going to be super, super long. Wow, but I underestimated how long. There was so much to it, so many different locales, and the number of new cities and new content was crazy. They just went, I couldn't believe how nuts they went with 5, how much there was to do. And I absolutely loved it. But there were some things that made it an uneven experience. It was actually a little frustrating. And as always, these are very off-the-cuff reviews, discussions, but I will do my best to avoid any kind of spoilers or specifics or anything. So just kind of give you my general feelings and impressions, because I don't spoil anything, especially for these story-driven type games. 5, you start off as Kiryu, and you start off with him yet again, as is the reoccurring theme throughout these games, him trying to leave that life behind and getting drawn back in to shenanigans with the Tojo clan and everything going nuts, and all the wonderful drama. And he's taken a job as a taxi driver, and for the first time is working under an assumed name and really trying to be more separate than some of his other attempts throughout the years. And that portion of the game, I'm typically someone who, throughout these, I don't spend 50, 60 hours on games very often. It has to be a really big, long RPG. But with these kind of games, I really focus more on the story, and I do the extra content that appeals to me the most. Like usually, as you're wandering around, you stumble upon some side stories, and I end up doing those. And some of the mini games and that kind of stuff, I kind of do what I want to do. I don't go out there though trying to complete everything. It's never really my goal. My goal is really just kind of have fun, and along the way, the things I discover that I like to do the most, I will do to the point where I no longer feel like doing them anymore with the mini games. With Kiryu's portion at the beginning of 5, I 100%ed everything there is to do in that whole section because I loved it. I loved the new city. It is probably my second favorite in the entire series up to this point, having played 0 through 6. I loved it so much. I liked it even more than Kamurocho, which is feels like home, when you go, because it's in every game, and it's the main city of the franchise. But the atmosphere of it felt for me like a kind of place that I would want to visit for a long period of time, or that I could actually live in. And so that sort of comfortable feeling really made me enjoy and want to explore the environment and get into the lives of the locals, do all the little subquests and all the little side content. I love doing that, and I'm also a very big racing game fan, especially arcade racing and a lot of SEGA stuff especially. So everything with the taxi driving job that he has, I was super, super into. There are 2 different ways you go about it. One is more casual, actually taking people in a taxi and trying to obey the traffic laws and things like that. And it's kind of like, it feels like Crazy Taxi, but you have to obey the law. It's like a toned down Crazy Taxi kind of thing. It was very fun. And then you have the racing segment, which is an entire storyline that is really, really, I think, important to understanding a lot of these side characters in the very beginning of this game to actually do that. It's totally optional after a certain point, but I feel like it's one of those that you will get so much more out of the city that you're in if you do that. and it reminded me of like watching Initial D, all the highway like drag racing, the street racing, and it just was a lot of fun. I enjoyed it, 100%ed like everything in there because I was having a blast, and the story is still really really good. The one thing that in playing these, that I'm kind of baffled by was, before I'd only played 1 and 2 back in the PS2, and in the years since then, I've heard so many times and read so many times people saying that, especially when 4 and 5 come up in conversation, that the stories are convoluted and difficult to follow, and I don't understand that, having now played all of these. I just not. Are you not paying attention? Like, it's just really weird to me. Even with with 5 has lots of reveals and twists and turns. And Amanda was just sitting, kind of watching me play portions of it, not even the whole thing, and she was calling what a twist was going to be several times throughout the game before it actually happened, and she wasn't even playing the entire thing. So like, I don't know. I feel like it's weird. I feel like maybe that comes more from a certain segment of fans of this franchise who maybe aren't paying quite as attention and aren't as involved with the storylines, because I've never found them to be super complex or convoluted in any way. Just pay attention. It's interesting to put these all together. Because just as like talking about this franchise as an aside, I've kind of found there to be two very distinct camps of fans of this franchise, which goes to show the wide appeal. If you haven't played these games, go and play them, because they're for most people. Most people are going to find something to enjoy, because there seems to be, the majority of people out there seem to be more of a thing they focus on the most, and what they love the most about these games are the endless number of side content, the crazy number of extra things there are to do, all the mini games, all the running cabaret clubs. Just there's a ton to do that's beyond just the main storyline, and there seem to be fans that they enjoy obviously the main story and exploring the cities or whatever, but their focus is more all the mini games and the combat. A lot of discussion of comparing the fighting systems between each game, so what's changed, what hasn't, what's different with each character, and getting down to real technical nitty-gritty details, and people really invested in that. And then there's the other camp that they enjoy that stuff, and they do side content. It's a lot of fun, and the fighting is a lot of fun, but they're not quite as technical and serious. They're not as fighting game minded, like you have the very serious, Street Fighter players and things like that, versus more casual. So like they still enjoy it, but it's not as technical and in depth in the experience, and they're more focused on the story and the characters and exploring the cities and being a part of escapism into a world. And I'm more of that. I love the side content, and when I find a minigame that I enjoy, I will spend, as Amanda will attest, hours sometimes playing and focusing on that, and it's a lot of fun. And I love the fighting mechanics, and there's very different throughout the series, starting the more arcadey style in 1 and 2 in the beginning on PS2, and then Dragon Engine's a very different feel. But as much as I love that, it's not as much of my enjoyment is more escaping and getting to explore and visit these cities, these worlds they've created, and learning about the people there and following the storylines. That's my main thing. So that starts off really well. I'm super invested at this point in 5. Then we go to Sejima, and it starts in you get a prison drama, which I absolutely loved. And again, there seems to be that camp that's more into the minigame stuff and whatever. Found it to be a little restrictive because you can't really do much here, a prisoner. But I thought it was great. I loved the little prison drama, and it just kept expanding because eventually there are circumstances which I won't divulge any details on. Eventually there is a prison escape, which is a very exciting thing, and you don't even go directly to the next new city. First you start off in one of my favorite parts of this entire game, a village, a snowy village up in the mountains that revolves around a hunting mini-game, which again, like the taxi driver thing, is super involved, very detailed, and you can spend a lot of time there. And I 100% of that whole thing too, because I loved it. That could have been its own game by itself. Triple the size of that village and make more content. It could have been like a explore the village and hunting like a game by itself I would have bought at a store. Like, it was that great. Then you move into another new city, and this I loved because for me, my dream vacation, if I could go anywhere in the world in a this specific time frame, I would want to go to Sapporo in the south of Hokkaido during like the big snow festival type thing. That's my dream, to go there one day. I've been to Japan, but when I went, we were in like Tokyo, which is kind of like where you tend to go. So I'd love to do that. I've always wanted to, for as long as I can remember. One day, maybe. But you got sort of a taste of that in this new town. So I had a real personal interest in this new setting, this new location, so I really, really loved it. And still at that point too, the story was keeping me very engaged. I was loving everything that was happening. I thought it was paced perfectly. It was doing kind of what 4 did with the many different characters and perspectives, but better. The narrative was tied together more neatly, it flowed more naturally, so it was fantastic. And so at that point, this is already, I'm loving it so much, and I'm doing literally everything you can do up to that point, and it's like my favorite game in the entire series by that point. And then it somehow gets even better in a way I was not expecting, because in this you actually get to play as Haruka, which I thought was fantastic and really changed things up, and it was very different, because, she's obviously not running around town doing like heat actions and bashing people into lampposts and things like that. She's not throwing bicycles into people's faces. It's a very different thing, and instead you're following the beginnings of the career of her as an idol. And it was way more fun than I ever thought. I thought it was going to be this kind of short, interesting little thing, and then he'd move on to the bigger beat-em-up Yakuza story. Totally wrong. It is super involved, and I was like cheering, excited to work my way through the Princess League, which is ridiculous, and Amanda's just shaking her head, especially because there's a trophy at a certain point that says you're a princess, and like, it's just funny in the context of this series. But I loved all the characters that were involved, and I love being her because she's one of the real central characters of the entire franchise, and is the catalyst for change, really, in the main character's life throughout all these years. So I liked doing that and actually being her and exploring her life and her growth. And I'm not usually, again, like with some of the other stuff throughout this series, I'm usually not a rhythm game kind of fan, but I was totally addicted to all the dance battles and like rhythm stuff for performances with her, and I completed again 100% of everything that I could do by that point, with all like the meet and greets and all the performances, and I was having a blast. So now we are, and then eventually, without saying how things are involved or whatever, somehow, eventually, Akiyama from 4 is involved in this portion of the story, and I really like him as a character as well, so it keeps getting better and better and better, and now we're like 3/5 of the way through Yakuza 5, and it is, at that point, without question, my favorite in the entire series. I've loved every single second of it. Each portion I could see, like, certain people aren't going to be as into the taxi driving or the hunting game or the being a pop idol. Some people aren't going to be as into that. I loved every single part of it, and if the game stopped there, if it stopped there and had a finale, or it kept up that pace and that quality, it would be not just my favorite game in the franchise, but one of my favorite games like ever. But then hits a wall, and this is where it becomes uneven, because we get yet another new city. You have some familiar locales and multiple new cities. Some are huge. Like, the number of stuff here that's new is, they made multiple Yakuza games and shoved it into one. And it was a total opposite effect on me, because you also have a brand new character. And I can't say a single positive thing about this portion of the game. It went from, I'm blown away excited for, 30-something hours at that point that I had played, and then I just hit a brick wall of disappointment and boredom. Just so frustrating. I found the new city with this brand new character to be not to my taste, I would say. It's well crafted. There's nothing wrong. It doesn't feel like it was an afterthought compared to other things, but it didn't feel like it had enough character. It felt kind of bland in a way. It didn't have, like, if I put up, looked at all the different cities throughout the entire franchise, the city itself has its own feel and its own character. And this to me just didn't. It was just kind of dull. And that was disappointing. So I really didn't feel like exploring much, which is one of my favorite things. Like, I looked everywhere, but I wasn't feeling engaged or enticed to really do a lot of side stuff. And then you have the new character that's put in, and Shinada to me was uninteresting, not sympathetic, and frankly boring, and he's my least favorite character that I've played throughout this entire franchise as far as using him in a combat scenario. So, don't like the city, don't like the atmosphere, I don't like the character, and I don't like playing him in fights. That's the majority of what's going on in a Yakuza game. So that's, 4 for 4. The only thing that is left would be story. And that, for me, fell completely flat in this section as well. And again, it's a personal taste thing, because if I don't like the city, I don't like the character. If I don't like being the character, it's hard to get involved in the story. And everything in his story. And here's where, like, if I was making a video with, like, completely spoilers, I would talk in depth about why I feel like his chapter was almost entirely unnecessary and added nothing to the plot. Everything that happened with him could have been truncated into a very short thing where you were either actually playing as Daigo or you pepper it into the other portions of the game, all the new information that comes about. Because otherwise, it's very minimal in a way, and easily could have been involved in other people's stories. What's pertinent to the main plot. Then you have the personal plot of the character, which I found completely uninteresting. And I can't just personally, I don't really like sports very much. I was always engaged in track and field and cross country and like weightlifting. When I was in my early 20s, I was really into bodybuilding and like that kind of stuff. So I've always been into fitness, but more of a health perspective. I've never really been into playing sports. And of all sports, the two that bore me the most are golf and baseball. And this was very heavy on the baseball, and I did not care. And I didn't like the character, and it was such a downer. I was on such a high. You can probably tell even from me just talking to this point, I was so excited and having so much fun, and then I just wanted to get through it. I didn't care. And that kind of soured the end of the experience then, because then we move into the final portion of the game, and somehow with everything that's going on, eventually you end up back at Kamurocho. Everyone kind of gets drawn to Tokyo for something, for a big event that's very spectacular and is being built up, and all these little twists and turns, and the web of the story is all connecting as everyone comes along to Tokyo for the finale. And the finale was good, but there were parts of it that felt a little uneven, and just was fun, and it was a great finale, but it wasn't quite the level as where the game started. I will say that they could have finished at 5. 6, could have been different, but as it exists, it didn't necessarily need to happen, because 5 feels like a huge send-off and a celebration of all the people that were important characters in the story of the franchise from 1 to 5. It really felt like a celebration and a big finale and a moving on, and it really kind of could have ended there. Maybe a slightly longer epilogue to wrap up a few things. It could have been, it was a celebration of the franchise to that point, and it had sort of a feeling of closure in a way. So it was a good ending and a good finale, but it wasn't quite up to par with some of the better finales, something like the end of 2 or the end of 0 in particular come to my mind. So it's still good. So 5 is frustrating because the first 3 of 5 sections are some of my favorites in the entire franchise. 4 is probably my least favorite thing in the entire series, and then the finale is just kind of okay. So it's a very mixed bag with 5. So like I said on Twitter and other places if you follow me. I have a lot to say in this video, way more than I have on any previous video talking about this franchise, just because there's so much involved in 5. It's just huge, and I have such more very detailed opinions on it. I could go on about the story forever, but moving on to 6 and really wrapping up a chapter in the franchise before it moves forward into new things, and that is Yakuza 6, Song of Life. And this one I was very curious to get to because it seems to be one of the most polarizing games in the franchise. There are other ones that, like 3 for instance, has really passionate fans, but they seem to be very clearly in the minority. It seems to be more of a least favorite, and that's the same with all of them, I feel like, where there seems to be people that absolutely love or people that absolutely hate each individual game. But 6 seems to be very split down the middle, and I was really very curious to see why and get to 6, because I've seen sentiments of very disappointing, especially compared to 5, and then other people that are like, you're crazy, this is just different. They had a different task than they did with 5, and they went somewhere else. And after playing 6, I get why, and I'll talk a little bit about why, because the differences, again, so I brought it up earlier, of why people like different things in the series. Because if you're in sort of the vein of why I enjoy the series, this is my favorite game in the entire franchise up to this point. I still have to play next 7, Like a Dragon, and I still have to play the 2 Judgment games, and probably get to them pretty quickly. So up to this point, and eventually when I'm done the whole franchise, I'm all caught up, I'll do like a ranking video and talk about why. But for now, this is my favorite without question. It wasn't even, talking about 5, there's so many differences, and there's certain things I like about others and dislike, and placing them in a ranking was kind of difficult right now. I have to think about it. This I don't have to think about. This is unbelievably, beyond every game before it for me, just in how much I felt invested and enjoyed it. And again, I've been playing these since I played the original PS2 games right around the time they came out. So it's been a long time journey with these, finally just catching up with the series after years of not playing, and not a single game in the franchise has connected with me in quite the same way as 6. And the same reasons why it connected with me are probably why some people didn't connect with it. I mentioned how 5 seems like a big culmination and a send-off to all the characters that were big essential parts of the franchise as you're going along. Goro, Haruka, Sejima, Daigo, all these characters, Akiyama, Date. It really feels like some of those, it was a big wrap-up and a celebration of that era of story, and it could have ended there with a slightly longer epilogue. They didn't need 6. But 6 feels like something a little different, and you have the Dragon Engine comparison to the earlier game, so it plays a little different, and the fighting system is far less complex and loses some of the arcadey appeal, and then that is expanded upon with the remake of 2. And the remake of 2 feels like a fusion of 6 and the Dragon Engine and the older styles from the game. It feels like a best of both worlds kind of thing. So for people who had that fighting game mentality and are very into all the movesets and the intricacies of different combat styles and what's better for what situation, playing as different characters and their differences, that really isn't in here, because in this game you are only Kiryu throughout the entire game, and he has a very simplified move set and only one real fighting style. It's very smooth, and I love the way it feels, and I actually really enjoyed it, but I could see if that's one of the things you like best, being a little disappointed. It's also very light on the minigame elements. What's in there is fantastic, and Amanda was laughing the entire time. I played through all of the video chat, the minigame. Also, there's a lot of funny stuff in this series. So what's there is great, but it is light. It might even be the lightest game in the series. I'm trying to think back to what was in the original PS1 version of 1, but it might be the lightest game as far as minigame type content. And even it only has 2 cities versus the like journey, the tour around the country in 5. And one of them is Kamurocho, and like a third of the city is inaccessible due to things that are happening in the storyline involving fires and all kinds of stuff going on. There's one new portion that's built up after a portion burns down, and that's really pretty. And there are some new buildings that you can go into you couldn't go into before, but there's a whole big section of the city that's not even accessible, so it's much more claustrophobic. And the new city is a lot smaller than many of the other ones, so it feels much smaller in scale, and that disappointed some people after 5 went off the rails and what they're kind of used to. But that in many ways is by design and partially by necessity. Necessity meaning working with the new engine, and like this game is beautiful, like, gorgeous, and not even just graphically but artistically, and I'll get more into that too. So part of it is by necessity in working with those new tools and not being able to do quite as much. And part of it is also by design, because this is laser focused on the story. There's still a ton of fun extra content to do. I spent, I think, about 40 hours on this, and it seems like most people beat this in like 16. So I did a lot of stuff. I had a lot of fun, but the narrative is the prime focus here, and the narrative leaves out the majority of the characters that you're familiar with up to that point. There are different methods in which jail time or a coma, or like just different ways in which many of those characters are somewhat removed or are there in a very limited capacity. And some people felt kind of like they wanted those characters to be more involved, especially as this was the final chapter where Kiryu is the main focus of the franchise, and it's a franchise built on that character's back. But 5 kind of gave me that. 6 was more of a focus on the theme of family and parenthood, and move those characters to the side to really tie things in a big circle from a lot of the themes from number 1, and focus on a new place and new characters that really put the focus on that narrative. And I loved it. I thought it was great. I loved all the new cast, as far as enemies have become friends, and just the new villains. Everyone that was new, I loved. I didn't see a single weak link in the bunch. I loved it. This is my favorite story probably in the franchise, very close with some higher ones. One of my favorite casts of characters, which is amazing because it's mostly new people. Really, really well done. Loved how they tied things together. I loved the new things. I loved Haruka has a baby, Haruto, and I loved the stuff with him, and it was adorable, and it was fun, and how the things evolved throughout the characters. And Onomichi, the new city, is hands down my favorite place in the entire franchise. I would live there. It is beautiful. I love the small town feel, but it has there's a sense of rich history, even before you get into the history, which one of the main plot points is a big mystery of the town, but there's a sense of a real place, and a sense of culture, and a sense of history, and a people, and it's fun, and I love being there, and I love the mini games. There's like a spearfishing mini game, and all these different things that feel appropriate to the setting, and I really enjoyed. And that entire portion of the game, while you're there, I was talking with Amanda, and she was watching parts of it, and some of the way the tone and the way the characters are even portrayed a little bit, and the gameplay feels a little different from 1 through 5. It really feels, I called it Shenkuza, because while you're in Onomichi, the way a lot of things play out, the feeling, the atmosphere of the game, and even the general kind of gameplay vibe and the way things move around, and even the way Kiryu is acting and some of the story beats they do, it feels like a merging of the way Shenmue, particularly Shenmue 1, feels with the way Yakuza feels. It doesn't have quite the same atmosphere as 1 through 5 or 0. It feels a little different. And as someone who prefers Shenmue overall to Yakuza, I loved the merging of the two, and it became kind of like a favorite of all type. I just loved it. And there were some really fun mystery elements in there, and it was brilliant. I loved that slower pace. I loved the feel when you're in Onomichi, and I just, to me, it was a brilliant experience. There were some really cool things going back to Shangri-La and like the one that Goro bulldozed into. There's some really cool fun stuff in there, and I really enjoyed it. Some amazing fights and some really good choreography, and in a lot of the fight scenes and the cinematography and the cutscenes is just peak for the series. It's my favorite soundtrack in the series. Definitely like my favorite. I loved every second of it. 6 is easily my favorite to this point in the series. But again, I explained a couple reasons why I think some people probably weren't as involved in it. But to me, it even took elements from previous games and improved them. You have the feeling in 3 of finding a new kind of small town group to be a part of, and this does that as well, but 100 times better than what 3 did. And 3, I enjoyed that element of it, but this, I felt more connected to those guys that you meet in a very short period of time that I did with a lot of people in many years of playing through the franchise. So I was completely invested in 6 the entire way through. I loved it. It might be, when I go back and play one of these games again, it's going to be 6. That'll be the first one I go back and play again because I had such a good time. So that is what I wanted to talk about with 5 and 6, and definitely this is probably going to be the longest video I ever do for this entire franchise, because 5 and 6, there's just so much to talk about with those two compared to every other game. Next up will be 7, but before that, it'll be a little while, because before that, Chocobo Racing. Still waiting for my copy to show up from PlayAsia, but that'll be the next thing that I tackle. Hope you guys are having a great week, and I'll see you around.